Welcome into TFW Live, the best kept secret in fantasy football, where we keep that week one feeling going all year long. This is episode 307, and we will be discussing which rookies are worth drafting and exactly kind of where we want to draft them with the one and only Matt Waldman. But first, support for TFW Live is brought to you by Manscaped, the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Their products, like this Lawnmower 4.0 right here, are precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped's Performance Package, the ultimate men's hygiene bundle, and you can join the 6 million men worldwide who trust in Manscaped with this exclusive offer from the Fantasy Whisperers to you, 20% off plus free worldwide shipping with the code TFWMAN. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code TFWMAN at manscaped.com. I am Big Travie, and I'm joined here now by my best friends, Johnny Game Time Hicks and Austin Sear. And a big welcome to Whisper Nation, all of you in the chat. Albert, Pizza Belly, Donnie, Jersey J, I'm sure will be in here at some point. We appreciate all of you. And a lot of gratitude for our members on YouTube who support the show through a monthly subscription. Speaking of Pizza Belly and Jersey J and Donnie. Also, Don Caples, Bailey Ziegler, Kevin Davey, Nick, Brett Zabo, John Credit, Eric Lorenzen, and the Hanimal join those crew as well in supporting. If you would like to join that growing list of YouTube members, click that join next to the video now. You get all sorts of cool emojis. You help us out, and you get access to, some common priorities. So it's a good thing. We also want to say thank you to our patrons. They've supported the show throughout since we've started this thing. We have big updates to our Patreon account coming this month, so stay tuned. And of course, got to thank all those who joined Whisper Nation via social media this week. Quentin Slobata, Ed McShane, Coach Patrick, Lewis Dodson, and Anita Marks, Bruno Bates, Big Dog Fantasy Football, The Specialist, Dynasty Pat, Steve Henrique, and New York Nick. And if you love fantasy football, you want to join a community where you know you belong, hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. We just want to get one more sub on this stream. Just one more. Could be you. If you're new, let us know where you're streaming from. We'd love to shout you out on the show. As mentioned at the top, we're going to go into these rookies with a very, very special guest, a legend in the industry, not just fantasy football, but football in general. Football Guys senior staff writer since 2009 and creator of the rookie scouting portfolio. Matt Waldman. Welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey.
How are you, my man?
Man, thanks for having me. And I like that you guys have Anita Marks joining your profile. She was a heck of a quarterback. And I did some shows with her way back in the day before she was on ESPN.
I didn't know that.
If that's the right Anita, if it's the same Anita Marks,
she works for ESPN right now. I DM'd her after she followed us, hoping to get her on the show in season. So we'll ask her about her quarterbacking days, see how she did.
Yeah, there you go.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for being here, Matt. We know you like to dive into the scouting and the rookies and also just ball in general, but we want to let Whisper Nation get to know you a little bit here before we get the show started. So we'll start off with a round of questions here. If you're down, what year did you start playing fantasy football?
I think it was 1994. And sadly, I was asked in an office league, I think the year before, and I literally just stood up the draft.
Oh no!
I was like, I forgot about it. They had no idea, So I was actually glad they let me back in that first year. So
that's awesome. Well, from then until now, check you out.
Yeah. Things change, man.
What do you root for, your NFL team or your fantasy team more?
My NFL team. At this point, there was a time it was probably my fantasy team.
Yes.
But now it's my NFL team. And really, I find that I don't look at my fantasy teams until Monday night.
That's probably such a peaceful way to do it.
Yeah.
You get older, you want the stress low, man. That's how it goes. Yeah.
I love hearing that's a bit of a fresh take. How about your favorite fantasy football player all time, Matt?
Probably has to be Edgerrin James because he was probably the boldest pick I ever made. I picked him in the first round as a rookie in a draft where I took him and then I followed up with Eddie George. And I could have picked him, Marshall Faulk, and or Eddie George and Falk was that year in '99 with the Greatest Show on Turf.
Ooh.
And that helped me do some major renovations on my house. So Edgerrin James and I was immatriculated at the U. So, getting a chance to watch Edgerrin James play during those first couple of years, he was unbelievable at that time. So it's kind of an intersection. There are certainly dozens of other players that I could mention, but James is just somebody that just right off the bat was so great. And I thought he was a Hall of Famer. He could have been even more than what he was, if not for the knee injury that he had in year 3.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of watching a player and enjoying it, I wanted to know if you've looked at a player coming out and then been completely shocked, like in a positive way, from his game in the NFL. Like his game in the NFL didn't really match the tape coming out, if somebody comes to mind.
Yeah, there's lots of guys, but the one that comes to mind the most is Alvin Kamara. Because when I watched Alvin Kamara, he was a fumble machine. He liked to bounce everything outside. And those are usually two things that you realize that guys need work with. Those are things that when I looked at a guy like Darren McFadden or CJ Spiller, they were players that people thought were just unbelievably high on, and I was not. And then Kamara exhibited a lot of those tendencies. But when he got into the league, he was terrific downhill. And I found out later, like years later, someone who was connected to in the league said to me that Sean Payton did not like Alvin Kamara coming out either. And that in a lot of ways, because he thought that he didn't take it up inside enough and was concerned about his ability to like run tough. And got on him about it early. And Alvin Kamara is one of those great anomalies who actually took to it very quickly and started and played strong. He's almost mystical with his contact balance.
Yeah.
Breaking tackles.
Well, then you see his workouts, and it's like, I kind of get why you are. I mean, you're balancing on the ball and catching other things. Yeah.
He looks like those Rube Goldberg machines we see in cartoons. He looks like he's the invisible person in the middle of the Rube Goldberg machine, making all those things happen. He's unbelievable.
Absolutely.
Matt, what is your favorite live draft memory?
Probably
not the one where you stood them up.
Yeah, not that one. I would definitely say probably taking Edgerrin James in the first round, in that because everybody laughed at me, and then I got pretty much every bit of money out of that out of that league except for one payment, which was to the runner up. So that was a great memory, especially because I had at the time, I think I left my cheat sheet somewhere. I was at my girlfriend's house and she lived like an hour away. And I think I drove and then we were going to be late, and then we were late getting started because I had to drop her off. And I think I did the closest thing I could do to the Dukes of Hazzard in Georgia, getting to that draft. And so I was really not prepared on top of that in terms of the way that I wanted to be. And it ended up being one of the best drafts I ever had.
That's Matt, what's a sound that you love? A sound you love?
A tenor saxophone.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You play sax, right, Matt?
I do.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
a music sheet in the background, right?
Yep, I've got some stuff going on back there. I play the bass and the saxophone. So
awesome. How about your favorite swear word?
Fuck.
Yeah. Pretty
nice.
Any iteration of that I can think of pretty much would be it. Yeah.
What's the most leagues you've ever played in?
Probably somewhere between 12 to 15 at a time.
Okay.
I've cut down now to where I'm at about 4 to 6 right now. And I'm trying to keep it at that. I know some people, I think Bloom probably plays in like 30 or 40, but I just find I like keeping it a handful.
Yeah. Most exciting fantasy football moment for you?
Oh man. I would say, certainly one of them, ones that worked out well was watching Chris Carter light up the Bears while I had an office mate. Just my first league was in an office where before the office came out, and literally I was Jim and my friend was Dwight, and we both managed a room, and we would play pranks on each other all the time. Like things like he would like put tape over the phone receiver, so when people would call in to reschedule, I couldn't hear them and it'd hang up on me. I'd tape his desk shut, and he'd be sitting, and like you'd see him like in the middle of a room, just like yank at it and couldn't do it. And he was just like this big old bear of a dude. Okay,
Pop his workout ball with a pair of scissors.
Yeah, he had one of those loops in the back of his shirt, and while he was saying goodbye to people, I talked to him for a minute, and I put some toilet paper in the back of the loop, and just as he walked across the room for like 20 yards, he was waving goodbye, and people started laughing, and I remember yanking it, and it literally came out before he could see it, but he turned around and looked paranoid. So I say all this because we decided he was a good fantasy player too. So David, if you're out there, but we had a bet once where we went over to his house and we went shopping the entire morning at the grocery store, and just pigged out. And all day we just talked trash. Like whoever was going to lose that matchup had to pay the bill for the groceries. So like we're just talking smack the entire time. And I think it was Chris Carter who just basically, went off in that game. And I could just basically, I remember getting up, I think after the touchdown, and it had been like later in the day. And I think I got up and just walked out the door and just said, thanks, and so we had a good time with that. Yeah, I think but maybe the most exciting one was when I lost a chance. I had a big comeback, and I had picked Fred Lane. If you remember Fred Lane way back in the day, who was an undrafted free agent running back out of Lane College with the Panthers when Tim Biakabutuka was this like supposed to be like the Breece Hall coming out of, way back then. And Lane was like the Isiah Pacheco, like made good, type of player. And I rode him all the way to like an unlikely playoff appearance against our favorite, the team that was the favorite. And because all my running backs got hurt early, and I needed like 20 points to win, and I had it marked to like 120 yards and a touchdown. And he got in the final drive, he got the ball most of the drive, and literally got the 20 points. He had the 120 yards I needed. He just needed a touchdown. He got at the 10, and I was watching this game in a bar with some, and there was a guy who was in front of me watching the screen who was freaking out over this game because he had bet some money on it, and he was like making a big deal, and I was quiet. I was nervously quiet, and he was like doing like a Broadway show on his, on his angst. He only bet $100. I had about $1,300 riding on this, and he Lane got the ball 1st and 10 inside the 10, gets to the 1. I'm like, I've got this. Literally gets the ball 3 straight times after that. They even get it to him on the 4th down and does not get in. And I was 1 yard short for that. So he's like, he freaks out. He goes, I just lost $100. Looks at me, and I got up and left, and it was like, I looked at him. I said, I just lost 13. A chance at 13 and left, but so I've had some heartbreakers like that.
Oh my God.
I love that you juxtapose. I don't love that happened to you, but I love that you juxtaposed it with the winning and the losing, because it's such a dichotomy that we deal with all the time in this game. Yeah. And you called it exciting because it was exciting, even though it ended in the bitter, or in the bitterness there. You called it what it was. I love that. That was awesome. How about a favorite game day beverage for you, Matt?
I'm a basic dude when it comes to drink beer. I mean, honestly, it's I've had all sorts of different kind of beers, and I can appreciate all that stuff, but just give me a Miller High Life. I'm fine with that.
Oh, let's go. Champagne of beers, baby. Let's go. Let's go.
You got a friend in Jesus over there.
Yeah.
There we go.
Hey, well, along with that, what is your best or your favorite movie theater snack?
Whew. I think probably it's a close tie, but I'll say probably like Raisinets and popcorn put together.
Yeah, nice.
Or I kind of and I like Twizzlers too, but I think those are But I'd rather have those than just like cherry coated plastic on a regular basis. So I'll just go. I'll say the popcorn and the Raisinets. Yeah.
So here's our last question as a part of this segment, moving into a little bit of football talk. Matt, you operate the rookie scouting portfolio, and you've done so since 2006. And I'm wondering if you could share some top-level rookie analyzing insights. Like, what do you look for most when you're evaluating players who have not yet touched the NFL field?
Man, we could go 2 days and not have enough time. I'll give you some quick ones. I mean, things like with quarterbacks, and Mark Schofield, who's my co-host on the Quick Game Pod that I do during the season, who's a former quarterback, does fantastic work. He's credited me for saying that he really learned a lot from me in this one area, which was that quarterbacks need to understand leverage of the coverage on the receiver, and that's the position that the defender is relative to the receiver at the decision point. You can talk all you want about cover 2, cover 3, mirror, all the different types of schemes and things that they do and how intellectual they are, but it really comes down. Quarterback is a performance craft, and when you're on stage performing, you have to have good timing, just like you have to have good timing with comedy or with your lines or as a musician. As a quarterback, it's the same thing. So you can have guys who you hear in the draft all the time. They ace the whiteboard. They sound like a coach, and they are unbelievably intelligent. Well, they may have all this knowledge, but you look at Brett Favre, who didn't know what a nickel was for the first couple of years in the league, or in the first couple of years in Green Bay after he was a sideshow joke for Jerry Glanville in Atlanta. And he was unbelievably confident when he knew where he needed to go. The ball came out immediately. And that's something that a lot of quarterbacks like Alex Smith, who, a Big 12 accounting firm would probably want to hire him, right now. But he's, in terms of his brains, but he was always a beat late or a beat or two hesitant at the big moment. And that's because the confidence and the intuition wasn't there. And they're learning that intuition is a big craft. So I would say overall, the closer you are into the middle of the field where you're aligned, and Rick Spielman brought this up on the Athletics podcast, and it's true from what I've seen as a scout for years, is that the closer you are lined up in the middle of the field, the faster you need to be able to process information, because you're dealing with more bodies. And that means that the way that you can convert what you see into action, and that means that you have to have an integrated skill in terms of techniques, concepts, and quick intuitive execution, and being able to create different combinations of solutions in a manner that aren't always going to be rehearsed. And so that would be a very high overview explanation for all those positions.
Love it. Love it, man. I almost want to just cancel the show and get into the 2 days worth of
show notes, dude. We're going off the script now.
But we're going to get through the show because I know Whisper Nation wants to talk about these rookies. Before we do, we're going to quickly go through some of the news and notes that we pulled a few stories. I know there's a ton coming in these days, but Michael Gallup, Jerry Jones was indicated that Michael Gallup will avoid the PUP and the reserve list. So really probably within the first 4 weeks. And in that case, Johnny, he'll be back here. So how does that affect, Jalen Tolbert? Obviously we have the line for Dallas. Does this affect you in any way? Are you looking to draft Gallup?
No, I still think he'll come and he'll be a little bit slow to play anyway. And they'll probably, limit his snaps. It does put a little bit of cap on the Tolbert, hype. But other than that, not huge major news to me.
And moving on to Washington Commanders coach Ron Rivera expects Antonio Gibson to be the primary kick returner this year. So Matt, I just have to say, speaking of a guy that we liked, some of what he did, how have you felt? Did you kind of see him as a flawed prospect that if they wanted to turn him to running back, that this was probably in his range of outcomes? Are you buying some of this panic on Gibson? Kind of speak on that.
It was definitely a wide range of outcomes for him because he was an athlete at Memphis. Usually when they recruit players and they say they're recruited as an athlete, that means we don't really know whether we're going to be able to turn them into a wide receiver or a running back. And that's what they did with Tony Pollard. They did with Gibson, is that they made them athletes. They used them as a little bit of both. I actually like Gibson a little more as a receiver than I did as a running back at the time, I believe, in terms of my grading. I'll have to go back and look. But I was there was promise with Gibson, and I think there still is, but he doesn't process the game very fast in the middle of the field because it's just wasn't in his range of skill sets to play certain types of schemes that you wouldn't see. At Memphis, it was kind of like you could out-athlete people, and also you could do some things with scheme where you're going to get them into space a lot more than what they're able to do in Washington. And, I like Brian Robinson. I think I had him as either my third or my fourth rated running back in this class. And felt really good about him because I thought he consistently grew every year and developed as a better player. He has very quick feet. He's a very good processor of information. He's a good pass protector, soft hands, and obviously can run for power. So he's gotten better as a decision maker every year. And you got to consider, people sometimes logo scout too much. They look at Alabama and go, well, he sat behind all these guys. Well, that's true. But exactly. Those guys would probably be in front of most other teams other than maybe a few others in the SEC or at the top of every conference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, speaking of an Alabama player, we're going to move on to Jaylen Waddle here. NFL Network's Cameron Wolf reports Jaylen Waddle has missed most of the last 2 weeks of practice with an undisclosed injury. Austin, are you concerned here? You think we'll get Waddle back in time for the season, or would you dip where you're taking him?
I don't have a comment on where I think when he's going to show up, but in terms of how I'm evaluating this, I'm not concerned given he had 140 targets and over 100 catches from Tua last year. My excitement is subdued, though, because it's a new coach. Tyreek Hill is coming in with a lot of enthusiasm. For my Dynasty squad, I love that. I've been loving the sleepovers and Tyreek kicking it with the dog and going on local shows and gassing up Tua. I love hearing Mike McDaniel say when Tyreek Hill was available, we said trade everything to get him. That gets me excited. And if I'm Jaylen Waddle, I'm feeling a little bit like I'm in high school and all my good friends started hanging out with some new popular kid almost. And I'm like, well, what's going on with me right now? But I'm not concerned about it. And I actually love picking up Jaylen Waddle shares. And I think you're seeing a bit of a dip on him. And I am eager to capitalize on that dip. Not concerned. I think the overall excitement is down, but I think that's just an opportunity.
He's Andy's new toy, dude.
Pretty much.
Moving on to the Chicago Bears. Our last little bit of news here. The Athletic's Kevin Fishbane reports the Bears wide receiver Darnell Mooney has been the most impressive offensive player at training camp. Matt, I don't know if this says more about the Bears. I just love to shit on the Bears, Packers fan here. But I do want to talk about Darnell Mooney, the player. We think he's a good player, obviously, and you have high hopes for him as the maybe the main vein for the Bears this year.
Oh, he'll definitely be that, but I think you're looking at probably an 1,100 to 1,200 yard receiver, which is very good. Can get him maybe inside the top 15 on the lower end of that. He's a highly prepared guy, and I like highly prepared players at that age range. And I think Justin Fields is going to take an easy step forward now that he doesn't have an impediment called Matt. Basically, getting in his way and putting him in situations where you look at the blocking scheme and go, how are they going to protect? How would anybody get protected in these types of scenarios? So I think that overall, Mooney is a good buy. He's not a guy that you're going to look at and go, well, maybe he'll be top 5 by the end of the year. No, I don't think that. But he's a high floor, good ceiling, not great ceiling.
All right. Well, speaking of ceiling, that's sometimes what's at play with these rookies. We're trying to figure out the mystery box that is rookies, and there's a lot to be had here. Usually, if you can pick the right one, that's what we want to try and do. So, Matt, what we've done here is taken Fantasy Pros ADP, and we've grouped these guys into like tiers based on where you're going to be drafting them overall. And so we've made these tiers out. In tier 1 right now, nobody is getting drafted higher than Breece Hall. He's going 37.7 overall. From the New York Jets.
My question about Breece Hall is he going to be able to justify his ADP, or are we just setting him up for failure? Because we've heard, like he's the RB2 on his team right now. That we got Michael Carter as the RB1. We've also got like the running back coach, coming out and saying, I explained it to my wife as which Pokemon I'm choosing in this battle is the way he described it, because it's just like situational. So my question is, with Breece Hall going in the 4th, sometimes the 3rd round, are we a little too hyped on him as a fantasy football industry, or can he return that ADP or potentially beat it?
He won't beat it. He won't return it this year. He was my top back in this class, just slightly above Kenneth Walker, but really you could call him 1 and 1A. It really didn't matter. But the landing spot is not good for him. The offensive line has gotten better in terms of personnel, but the cohesiveness still has to be proven. And all I know is that I was not a big fan of Zach Wilson coming out. I had Davis Mills ahead of him. I think I had 5 or 6. I had 5 or 6 players ahead of Zach Wilson. Was not a fan at all. I equated him to more of the Baker Mayfield of this class, another player I didn't like coming out.
Dude.
And so when you look at it from that perspective, the fact that Joe Flacco made this offense look better last year, immediately when he came in the game, old Joe Flacco. Okay, I mean,
say it again for
elite,
and
elite
I'll say,
old Joe Flacco.
Yeah, elite old Joe Flacco made them look pretty darn. Also gave the offense energy when Wilson left the practice field this summer. He made Elijah Moore look like the player everyone thought he would be. But the problem is that the Jets organization spent a lot of draft capital on the number 1 overall pick, and they're gonna ramrod him in there for good or for bad for the next couple of years to see what they have to give him time to develop. The problem is that that means that the game scripts are going to flip so that the Pokemon that they put in is going to be Michael Carter, who is the better blocker right now, who is the top pass receiving back in that draft class last year, and who is a very good decision maker between the tackles. He's not as fast, he's not as big, he's not as strong, but he's more refined. And the 2 areas where it's going to matter the most is the area with passing down game scripts, where they're going to be behind a lot with that Jets defense, and Zach Wilson doing what Zach Wilson hopefully won't do as much of last year. And if that's the case, now if Zach Wilson takes a major step forward, then that's the way for Breece Hall could make his ADP, because he will then be in those run game scripts where it matters to put him in. And it's not like he can't improve as a pass protector and that it might not happen quickly. He's a good football player, but it's most likely that it's about, whether you're reading the block, that you're making the right adjustments with, pass protection, setups and games that he has to be on the same page with the quarterback and the line, and making those late adjustments that are difficult for rookies. I mean, A.J. Dillon was one of the best pass blockers I've seen. Same with Ramondre Stevenson in college. But both of them could do it physically. Everyone focuses on the physical. Yeah. It's about the diagnostic, and it takes a year. And that's what Ramondre Stevenson had to do. So it could happen for Hall, but really, if people are gonna shit on a player after, when it comes to Breece Hall disappointing, don't look at Breece Hall. Look at the guy in front of him handing him the ball.
I like that, man.
Speaking of players handing in the ball, we're not totally sure who's going to be handing Ken Walker the rock, and that's part of the concern that I'm trying to air out, Matt. Ken Walker right now going 91.3 as of yesterday when we put this together. I imagine that number has gone down a little bit and will continue to go down a little bit as he's recovering from surgery. So my question is, what concerns you most right now about Ken Walker? Is it the injury, or is it the learning time that he's missing right now because of said injury? The other running backs on the depth chart, the offense, or maybe something else? Where are you currently at on Kenneth Walker III?
The lower he can drop, the longer you can wait to be in a draft where you can pick him, the better value potential you're going to get from him. He's a fantastic football player, very polished. He was the more refined back of the two between he and Hall. So he's more game ready right now. Pass receiver, blocker, decision maker, everything you want from that perspective. He just doesn't have quite as much upside as Hall, which means the difference between a top 5 back and a guy who could be a perennial number 1 generational player. And I don't think Hall's that type of player, but it's certainly that's the upside that could happen if he put it all together. So what worries me is one, Penny is Rachaad Penny is a terrific runner who has finally figured it out, and he's going to stay healthy. If he stays healthy, you're right, he could be a beast. So you're going to have a split right there. The second thing is, game scripts aren't going to be all that lovely. Certainly, you worry about the offensive line. I think Walker is a very patient runner, and is someone who can be very creative. So I'm not as worried about that as I would be maybe with other schemes. But knowing whether it's going to be Drew Lock or it's going to be Smith, whether Drew Lock is going to study enough to be the, to understand the good run calls and checks. And I know I'm casting shade, but I mean, it's the truth. It's one of the things that I've rated about Drew Lock was saying when people said he's the next Patrick Mahomes because they saw a couple of crossbody throws at Missouri. One of the things that I mentioned with him is that he's that guy who got enabled in high school. He was a star. He had a big arm. He could move his body, move well. He was a good athlete. And he got to a mid-tier SEC school, and they're like, we're happy with you because you're winning enough games for us. There's things you can work on, but you only have 20 hours a week to work on stuff unless you do it on your own time. So if you're not going to, this is stuff you can work on your own time, but we're not going to bench you over the things that you're not prepared for at the level that you should be as you're trying to develop into a pro. But when he faced the upper tier SEC schools, he looked like someone who was trying to someone who maybe they're pretty good at math, but they but they have to study for the physics test. And then when the physics test happens, they didn't study, and now they're trying to do it the way that they were told in class, and they can't. And you can tell they're a beat slow with what they're trying to do, and they can't get the answers right. That was what he looked like. And I remember explaining that. My buddy C. Salami at the Audible at Football Guys talked to Drew Lock's dad and said this on the air. He said Drew Lock's dad actually said, I've been telling Drew for years that he needs to study more, that he needs to prepare more, that he needs to be that and that it was absolutely right, that it wasn't Drew's a bad kid. It's just that he just thought that because coaches were blowing sunshine at him because he was a gifted player and was good enough, great in high school, good enough in college, and very good in college, that he could do the same thing in the pros. So when Peyton Manning reached out to him and said, anything you need, let me know. I'll be more than happy to do anything you want, in terms of being there for you if you want.
It's like, hold my towel.
And that's right. And he just said, and he didn't do anything until he was about to lose his job. And then he started working with Peyton Manning. Meanwhile, Skylar Thompson, a player who was my top ranked quarterback this year in my pre-draft, basically has been working with Dan Marino from the first day he got there.
This is off script, but I have to ask because it is a natural segue. Johnny and I are both Cardinals fans. We talk about Kyler Murray a lot. Your insights are second to none. Where are we at with Kyler Murray and his studying?
I'm not as worried about it just yet. I think there's I mean, I think he's
not yet. He said
he's fine. He's fine with what we're doing. Where I would worry is if they get a new regime and the coach is like, I'm not attached to you and I don't want you because I don't think you're the type of player that I want at the quarterback position. He's not great in the pocket in terms of maneuvering the pocket. He's great at He's great at running and breaking the pocket. He's frenetic when staying in the pocket, and that's an issue. But in a wide open offense, it's a combination of both. Because Drew Brees could do it, Russell Wilson can do it, and Kyler's not that. You're really looking between defenders than you are over defenders. So for him, it's more that his first move is Michael Vick-like, which was, when you're look at Russell Wilson, who can move with the best of them, when he can take incremental steps in the pocket to avoid pressure and then know when to make the dynamic movement. Kyler Murray is dynamic movement first and then figure out whether he needs to right himself later, which means he drops his eyes from coverage, The ball goes way out. He ducks his head. He's in this. He can't even stay straight to be able to get the throw off fast, and it makes his receivers work harder because of that. But at the same time, he can create long enough doing that to then get a guy wide open and make it work with the arm that he has. So it's kind of like saying, I can only think of a basketball analogy. It's like, Dominique Wilkins, he wasn't a great defender back in Atlanta days, way back when, if you remember who he was.
Oh, yeah.
But he could score buckets. He was one of the best scorers ever, and he was one of the great NBA players. But there are lots of players like that. I guess Harden is probably a guy like that who doesn't defend, but he scores. He's valuable because he can score so much that you deal with the defense. And I think Kyler Murray's that kind of player.
I like
awesome, man. I could sit and listen to you talk about all these quarterbacks all day long and players that are already, established in the league as well. But we've got to get through some of these rookies for sure. So it's my job to keep us on track.
Blowing up, dude.
Yeah, the chat's got questions and Pizza Belly asking about James Cook. That brings us to our tier 3. Drake London, James Cook, and Chris Olave all going between 101 or 116 overall. So they're in that same kind of frame. Matt, I had a question on London. We've heard the industry argue, and maybe wrongly or incorrectly, but hopefully you'll be able to educate us here about London's separation in college. That was a big hot item about what he was able to do if he was able to separate or contested catch and all that stuff. And now we're hearing people talk about his quarterback play. Obviously, he's got the injury. Hopefully, he can come back in time for week 1. But where do you stand on London's talent and what's possible for him in this year, just with all the targets up for grab there?
Yeah, well, London was my wide receiver too, pre-draft, and I kept him there post-draft, just behind Olave. Olave to me was a tier above, and my top 2 receivers last year, really almost ever in terms of what I graded and score, were Jamar Chase and then Waddle just behind that, and Waddle was very high up there, and Olave would have been just below that.
Wow.
He's a refined player.
Oh.
London is a good player. London is certainly someone he can separate fine. He's not Mike Evans. He's closer to more of Michael Pittman, Mike Williams, T. Higgins. He's in that archetype, which is a plus possession receiver who can win on play action routes, who can win on routes that start inside and break outside, sail routes, over routes. The Vincent Jackson thing, you could certainly see where some of that comes into a kind of a free access receiver. But he's great at the catch point, obviously. So when you look at Atlanta, it was kind of a neutral landing spot in this sense. Long term, short term, it's a bad landing spot because it's Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder, and I don't think that either of them will be long-term starting quarterbacks in the league. That's just kind of my viewpoint with those 2 players. But at the same time, there's enough talent there where he's going to get some decent matchups working inside out if they keep Kyle Pitts outside, which they're probably not going to do, which means he's going to have to win on the outside early on. There's no Calvin Ridley to balance it out. So it's going to be he's going to be trial by fire pretty much every week against the top cornerback if the top cornerback isn't playing Kyle Pitts. So can he succeed? Yeah, but I think you're looking at like kind of a Corey Davis beginning in the same way that Corey Davis began with Mariota.
You touched on Olave a little bit, and great insights again on Drake London here. Pizza Belly does bring up this is one of our true blues, wants to know a little bit on James Cook. Matt, could you touch on James Cook here? He's the last one in this tier before we jump over to tier 4.
Sure. And I'll just say about Olave, my response, if you're in a dynasty league, is go get him, make him your top player on the board. I think he's that good.
All right, Travis, trade him to me.
Yeah. But
No way.
Cook isn't far behind. I had Cook lower pre-draft because as much as I like his game, I mean, obviously he's a fantastic pass catcher, and more importantly, he's a good receiver in the middle of the field, understands how to find openings, and can make the tough play. He's good between the tackles in the sense that he makes good decisions. He has excellent footwork. He withstands contact pretty well, even though he's not a real after-contact guy, but he can really manipulate defenders and set up runs well. He's a smart runner. The problem I had with him is that you look at his size and you go, well, what team's going to make him a lead back? If he's in Green Bay, would that work out? Probably not. Is he in Chicago? Probably not. Cleveland? No. Barring the players who are already,
right
there in a vacuum. So when he landed in Buffalo, you realize, oh, well, they've got a short, slow, not very quick, but excellent vision running back in Devin Singletary, who's doing okay there. Imagine if they put a short, fast, quick back with good vision on that team who catches the ball even better. So Cook to me is the perfect fit there. And I'm thinking of old school players, but Eric Metcalf, when he came to the Cleveland Browns, I believe had an 1,100 yard total yards from scrimmage season as a rookie, as a running back. And then they eventually moved him to a slot receiver role because over time they just felt like that might have been a better fit. But I think he can be kind of an Eric Metcalf, Austin Eckler type of back in terms of the range. The high end upside isn't going to be Eckler-esque right now, but I think he's a guy that should be in your top 5 in terms of based on fit.
We were talking when the dynasty drafts were rolling around, our rookie draft, our dynasty league of record, we were talking like maybe his aggressive outcome for this year would be like an Alvin Kamara rookie season, and then maybe even a David Johnson rookie season where he's getting a lot of work as the pass catcher to begin, and then eventually just takes over the job year 2, year 3, something like that.
I think that's a good assessment, and to me he's a guy that if you can get him, what was his in a redraft league, I would think you're getting him sometimes. In a home league, you're probably getting him somewhere between rounds 6 and 9.
It's like the 8, 9 on this Fantasy Pros ADP. Yeah,
8, 9. I think if you can get him in round 8 or round 9, you're doing fine.
And lastly, on that one, in redraft here, round 8 or 9, in those drafts right now, guys going in that similar range to Olave, Cook, and London. Some of the more exciting ones I saw: Christian Kirk, Melvin Gordon, Robert Woods, Michael Carter. Are you leaning to the new bag with the rookies, or would you pick up one of those veterans instead, rounds 8 or 9?
Well, if I'm building and I got running backs early and I felt good about those running backs, Robert Woods would be high on my list just because he's reliable and he is healthy enough running without problems, and he's going to be the main man there. They're going to need him. So I think that he's a safe pick with some upside. Michael Carter, I would seriously consider too, just because from what we're seeing, he's the guy that they rested in the preseason, and again, we talked about the game scripts. So, but Cook to me is a guy that if you're shooting for the highest upside for the takeover backfield and to be a slot receiver, and look, I'm not a big Gabriel Davis fan. I think he's okay, but I don't get the love for him in the sense that, I've done some stuff on Twitter showing why he had the big game against Kansas City and other teams, which is because the teams were paying attention to 2 other players, Stephon Diggs and Dawson Knox, and they were banking on that they could get to Josh Allen before he could get to the wide open, slow developing play route to Gabriel Davis. And they lost because Josh Allen is unbelievable at being able to buy time and rocket the ball. And even the play that he made this preseason that people are going off about
was all about Josh Allen.
It was all about Josh Allen.
I know, man. It was an absolute dart. I was just like ridiculous. Yeah.
So who would I take over? To me, let other people go off on Gabriel Davis and think that somehow he's going to be like a number 1 receiver when he's at his ceiling of value. Give me Cook, or even like in Dynasty, just hold on to Khalil Shakir, because at the end of the day, those 2 guys might actually overtake Gabriel Davis in the pecking order one day.
Yeah, because they target that slot receiver almost like second most of any of their other positions there.
Well, we could say on the Bills for a while, but that's why I've been kind of on taking Isaiah McKenzie late, because they've got him not only playing the slot now, but playing if Diggs goes down, if Davis goes down, he'd be like the fill-in guy. Yeah. So similar to the Cook take, right? Where if you want to invest in the Bills, skip the high price guys and go later and get some of these guys like Cook with upside, maybe McKenzie, and then Shakir and Dynasty as well. Yeah. All right, so we'll move on to tier 4 here, and this is about the 120 range. 120.7 is Dameon Pierce, all the way to Garrett Wilson at 129. This includes Brian Robinson, Treylon Burks, and David Bell within this tier based on Fantasy Pros ADP. So Matt, this tier includes like the ascending running backs after a strong preseason, also some potentially slow to start wide receivers. Which is more likely to be true for you this season, that Pierce and Robinson are worth their excitement, or that Burks and Wilson are going to take some time to be valuable in fantasy football?
It's going to be truer that it's going to take some time for those two receivers to be worthwhile in fantasy football. And the one you want is the one you didn't talk about, is David Bell. Because David Bell, all he does is get open in the middle of the field and catch the football. And that's the thing, that when you look at the Cleveland Browns, they want to play a defense that's not too aggressive. They're trying to just keep them from scoring points. They're not going to be a highly aggressive team because they know they want to just be able to keep the game in check for Jacoby Brissett so that they can run the ball. But here's the thing. I've been a Cleveland Browns fan for all my life, pretty much. And what they plan on doing in Cleveland goes wrong. So most likely, whatever their plan is, it's going to go to shit. So
shout out Dog Pound though for having the most attended stadium out of the entire
their
NFL.
Fans are legit.
I have never been to that stadium. I used to go to Cleveland's old municipal stadium, and that was the first game I ever saw was against the Dolphins, with Don Shula's Dolphins, with Greasy and Paul Warfield. I was like 5 or 6 years old, and that stadium would sway from the fans. It was like awesome. Which wasn't scary as a little kid, because you're like, oh, it's an amusement park ride, right. But like, it was great. But to say David Bell is probably going to be that guy who doesn't have. I think his upside this year could be 80 catches. He could be an 80 catch, 700 yard guy, 800 yard guy this year. And
Amon Ra of this year, you think, maybe, because Watson is going to come back later?
Yeah. I joke that he's like a half cup Jarvis Landry, a quarter cup of like DeAndre Hopkins, and maybe an eighth of a cup Larry Fitzgerald. And combine all that together.
Okay. That's quite the cocktail.
And
I drink that up.
It is.
I'll take one of those on Sundays.
Yeah,
I'm getting drunk. I'm getting drunk listening to it right now.
Yeah, he's great. And who else do they have? They have Donovan Peoples-Jones, who's a terrific athlete, but is like he's that guy that
he's inconsistent. That's his biggest problem.
He's the numbers chasers go after him, and then Cooper's
great.
He's steady. But Njoku is a guy that wanted out and then saw that they were going to be good and then begged to come back in and hadn't worked at his game enough. Bryant is a little bit more of an interesting guy to keep an eye on long term. Yeah. But they need a guy who can win in the middle of the field, because that's what's going to be open, and they're going to let him dink and dunk to run out the clock, because that's what they're going to need to do, is throw the ball a lot in those situations. So I like him. I'll just say quickly, Garrett Wilson, very talented, needs to do his homework on how to catch the football in terms of hands positions. I talked about this a lot with his game, where he had a lot of lapses that he thought a lot with that, and they're having issues with him dropping the ball. He's kind of a Marquise Lee type, where he thinks he can out-athlete people more often. He's not as much of a technician as he needs to be, but could be really good if he gets better. Treylon Burks, playoff coverage, plant somebody where his break path is going to be, and he doesn't know how to out-finesse you. And that's going to be an issue with him. He does not know how to get off press. They're going to have a lot of schemed plays for him, but how successful those can be after the NFL sniffs them out by game 3, game 4, they get old pretty quickly. So Pearson Robinson, like both of them at their ADPs, especially in PPR leagues, I don't think their upside is enough where you're going to go, ooh, I have dreams of running back 1 in my head, but they could give you mid-range running back 2 value if everything hits right and the rest of their team plays well enough so that they're in decent game scripts. Especially Robinson's going to need that. Pierce, if they're wise enough and go, we're going to throw him the ball because he's one of the best receiving backs in his class, he could wind up with kind of being your lower middle class DeAndre Swift in terms of value production, which makes him running back 20, running back 21.
Right. Yeah. All right, so thank you for succinctly going through all those guys. I was going to try and ask you about Pierce, but you got it there because you're a pro. We're going to move on to tier 5 here. That starts at Isaiah Spiller going at 135. It spans all the way to Skyy Moore at 149 overall. We've got Isaiah Spiller, George Pickens, Rachaad White, and Skyy Moore, as I mentioned there.
Go ahead.
My big question, I'll be honest, it's a personal question here. I want to ask you: are you on the Claypool bandwagon, or are you? Because lately we've been getting some George Pickens highlights, and they're saying even Claypool saying he's going to be one of the better receivers this year. We do tend to see. Younger wide receivers. Juju did this, and Claypool did this. Like their rookie year, they have like this, magical season, and then they kind of fade away. Is that what's going to happen with George Pickens this year, or are you saying no? I think Claypool, because of the change at quarterback and different situation, that Claypool could actually have a better year this year.
I think it's just hard to trust Steelers wide receivers right now because of their quarterback situation and bad offensive line and the changes and not knowing what's going to happen. As a talent long-term, I'm in on Pickens. Claypool was a guy that 3 years ago when he came out, I was not high on him. After 6 games, I studied his tape to see what was going on. And I showed the difference between how he was played in the first 6 games and how he was played in the 7th game. In the first 6 games, you could tell he was not facing the primary corner. Defenses, when they did play zone, their first shift was always over to Johnson or Juju Smith-Schuster or the tight end. They always overreacted to one of those players and let Claypool give up. Claypool get open. When they did scheme, when Claypool did get one-on-one deep and they targeted him, the cornerbacks underestimated his ability to win at the boundary, and they didn't play as tight. Week 7, they put their better guys on him. They rolled the coverage over first as the priority to him, and they made sure that they were glued to him at the boundary. And from that point on, he hasn't been worth anything as a fantasy player. And it hasn't changed. Maybe it'll change as a slot player, but I don't think it's going to happen. But Pickens is a really promising guy. He has to learn how to position himself at the catch point in ways that are not going to show up in practice, but show up in games where real defenders who are playing real football on him in a real game situation are going to force him to jump straight up and down. When you attack a football, you don't dive backwards. And you see a lot of guys do that. They look like they're laying out and they get parallel with the ground. They're opening up their chest to the ball and the defender getting that. The best receivers, Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase early on in his career, Justin Jefferson, when you jump up to win the ball, you jump back for it. You don't jump backwards. That means that you're not tracking the ball really well. You're jumping late. They jump early enough so that they stop early. The guy overruns them. They get straight up in the air. Now their back is to the defender. The defender can't reach through to win the ball, and they win it. And Pickens has to work on that. He might get better at it early on, but I haven't seen evidence that he has. He's going to be good, but it's going to be like that Martavis Bryant Claypool thing. He's going to bank on early. Let's see what happens after the opposing defenses actually scout their first 4 or 5 games of tape and start developing game plans against them, because that's what happens in the league. And that's why the media goes nuts about the quarterback for 4 weeks who gets in there and he's the next great thing. And then defenses say, well, now we've got enough tape to do a scouting report. That's what happens with young players. So Claypool, I would put that there. In terms of I would be more Pickens. I like Skyy Moore. He kind of reminds me of, he could have a Jeremy Maclin like first year, which Jeremy Maclin was like an 800 or 900 yard receiver who was in the top 20 in PPR leagues his first year as a rookie. I think that could happen for him. It's just a little bit of a cloudy situation, but I would much rather count on Patrick Mahomes delivering Skyy Moore a football than a rookie and Mitchell Trubisky with that. So I'd put Skyy Moore above Pickens. I like Spiller, but obviously he's behind Joshua Kelly right now, and Kelly's played well, and I like Kelly coming out. I just think he lost his confidence early, and that can happen in the league. Spiller also has some issues he's got great footwork, but with certain plays that are not gap plays, with pulling blockers, and even with pulling blockers, he doesn't always he can freelance plays that he shouldn't, and it gets him in trouble. Pacheco's interesting.
Yeah.
And I compared him to kind of like a Cam Akers type of talent coming out. I thought that he was underrated with his decision making. He still has work to do between the tackles, but he's a guy who really catches the ball well. I mean, like, has terrific tracking of the football, and that was something that stood out about his tape. And he played in a Rutgers offense where oftentimes people could mistake bad decisions that he made, really with going, I'm either going to get planted in the backfield or I have to do something right now because I can't wait all day for my pulling guard to get around the center. And he often had to do that. So he's going to need to acclimate, but he has the type of upside that I would be on him more in Dynasty than in redraft right now. But he's someone that if the round 12 thing's too early, but after round, if you can get him around round 15, round 16, I would be okay with that.
Sort of that last ditch stash in your pocket there at the end there. We kind of snuck into tier 6 here. So the rest of tier 6 with Pacheco in that 150 to 163 range is Jahan, Dotson, Christian Watson, and Tyler Allgeier. I wanted one more note on Pacheco before we get to the other guys' questions here. We see one of the viral clips going on is that he missed an assignment, or just basically missed going to the outside, and Mahomes is all pissed, like going to the outside. Do you think that's what you saw in his tape and something he can overcome, or is something that we'll likely see in like his first year, stuff like that?
That's just stuff that happens with every player in their first year. They miss assignments. It's just, there's a lot thrown at them. So, if he continues missing assignments, they'll find somebody else, and he'll have to work his way into gaining that trust. And there's likely going to be some ups and downs with him that way. But Andy Reid has always been known for giving late round backs a chance, ranging from Derek Gore, Spencer Ware, Correll Buckhalter. You can go, Darrell Williams. You can go on. He's done that, and when he's had top guys and they don't perform all that well, if they had high draft capital, he didn't care. He'd put in the guy who's worked his way into a position. So keep that in mind. He'll give Pacheco a chance if Pacheco earns it.
I have a question about Jahan Dotson because, draft capital was very high for Washington taking him. We're not super sold that even Terry McLaurin. We are on the show. We love Terry McLaurin.
Sure.
Think he's an excellent wide receiver. But how is I guess my question is, how is Dotson going to even be fantasy relevant if Terry McLaurin is barely fantasy relevant in this offense? Is there something we're overlooking? Is Dotson, really that good that he can kind of piece together maybe a potential wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 season this year with Washington?
I think it can be a wide receiver 3, maybe even a strong one, mainly because if they play from behind enough and they need to, again, it can be that David Bell effect of being in the middle of the field, playing in the slot, where they're like, we'll let Washington win if they can piece together a 10-play drive with Carson Wentz and him not make a mistake. And then if they score that way, then we're okay with that. And that would mean Jahan Dotson would get more opportunities in that fashion in the middle of the field. But in terms of the deep ball, in terms of all the different things that you would look at that he can do well, I don't think Carson Wentz is going to maximize that out of him. So I'm not targeting him there. And frankly, all the guys that you have in that tier that you mentioned, Christian Watson, Allgeier. Allgeier I was not high on. I don't think he really diagnoses angles well as a runner and a pass protector. And I think that Dameon Williams, only reason he's gone is because Khalil Herbert was that good in Chicago. And then I love Watson. I love Watson as a player, but this is the same thing with Romeo Doubs, because we can talk about him. He's getting a lot of buzz. Yeah. Well, the thing about Romeo Doubs is he was always really good. 90% of his game looked like a first-day starter until the catch point. And again, positioning himself at the catch point, tracking the ball right, getting his hands in the right position to win the ball. When you watch, he's always making a wild play in camp, at least once a day, Aaron Rodgers says. Yep. Then you watch the preseason.
He's also dropping,
then he can't
he's
catch.
fighting or dropping balls. He makes some big plays. because of his separation. But when he had to make some plays where he had to use the right hand position, couldn't do it. And then we're hearing this week, Aaron Rodgers, well, these young receivers are going to have to stop making mistakes if they're going to want to see the field. And that's one of those things where what that means is Aaron Rodgers sees the field a certain way. The receivers have to read the coverage like Aaron Rodgers. They're not doing it. Who's the guy everyone says is not going to make the roster and is suddenly coming on and making plays?
Sammy.
Sammy. Yes. At a deal where you go, if he's healthy, 3 out of the 4 times he played 13 games, he's been a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2 but he's only done it in 4 seasons that he's played 13 games. Well, if he could possibly make this 4 out of 5, and at round 16, 18, 20, where you can get him, I'll take that chance.
Love it. Thank you so much, Matt. This has just been an awesome dearth of knowledge. We just appreciate everything you've given us here. Just maybe quickly tell the people what you're working on. I know the RSP, but what else you got going? I know gut checks are coming out and all that good stuff as well.
Yeah, certainly. If you don't know about my work at Football Guys, I've been writing there since 2009. I have a gut check column that I do every Wednesday and Thursday during the season. Or actually Wednesday during the season, Thursdays preseason. And then I have something called the Top 10 that I put out on Mondays at Football Guys, which is a film analysis where I take clips of games that I've watched throughout the day and give you fantasy and football mixed insights that kind of try and give you fantasy insights based on X's and O's and scheme and craft of playing football. And then of course, the RSP, I've got projections thanks Jay. I've got projection service that is that's available for $24.95, where I project every player for Dynasty and give redraft and Dynasty, not redraft, long-term and short build, win now builds with cheat sheets that are geared towards each of those, as well as long length that do tiered and rankings for that. And then, of course, there is, the RSP, which is available for $21.95. And that gives you, as much in-depth about the rookie skill positions as you'll find anywhere.
You have to give a big public thank you to you for Patrick Mahomes in his second year, not his rookie year, but Patrick Mahomes in fantasy was because of that top 10 film watching piece that you put out for Football Guys. And then I know you're famous for the Russell Wilson, you're famous for seeing Russell Wilson before kind of a lot of people did. So get over there, follow Matt Waldman on Twitter, and obviously can consume all that information.
Before we let you go, Matt, I just got to say, we hear a lot of commentary in this world. When you speak, it's information, it's not noise, and it's so clear. And I just feel genuinely grateful to be able to know this is the well we can pull from. A lot of people are pushing a lot of wells, but as the points Travi just brought up, this well's not going to do you wrong. And I really appreciate the work you have put in to be able to deliver such strong and calm takes. It's the sign of a man who has been there before, and that is so clear, and we are just better because of you. So thank you.
I appreciate it very much, guys. And obviously, I'm going to get my share of players wrong. Nobody bats 1,000, that's for sure. But you're going to know why I have the take that I give, and that's what that's really what I'm trying to do, is to teach people how the game looks, how it works, and what I learned from other people, and try and share that knowledge. So I very much appreciate that, and I look forward to joining you guys again.
Yeah, we look forward to having you. You learned us a few things or two. So for Johnny Game Time Hicks, for Austin Sear, I'm Big Travi. We're the Fantasy Whisperers, and we'll see you next week. Peace.
Right here.
Hey, do you like mock drafts? We do too. You can come back every Monday and mock with us. Check out one of these videos and make sure you're liked and subscribed.